Sometimes, the very thing we try to throw away is the most precious gift life has given us. Ethan was 28. At an age when most people were expected to have made it, he had almost everything society called success: a marketing job at a major international firm, a salary big enough to rent a luxury apartment in the heart of the city, a healthy savings account, and a calendar packed with business trips that doubled as vacations. But when the office lights went out at the end of the day, Ethan often stayed behind, resting his chin in his hand, staring at the black screen of his laptop as a quiet emptiness crept into his chest. Marketing had never been his passion. At first, Ethan told himself he'd put in a few years in the grind, building up skills and a financial cushion before chasing his own dream. But 5 years had passed, and he was still caught in the endless loop of KPIs, deadlines, and back-to-back meetings. Every morning he woke up feeling like he was running in a race without a finish line. He still laughed with colleagues and dined in fancy restaurants, but inside, he no longer felt much of anything. A month ago, during a high-pressure strategy meeting, his boss had publicly scolded him for an unfinished report. Ethan didn't react. He wasn't even upset. He just felt tired. That night, he sat for hours by the apartment window, watching traffic flow below, and asked himself, what am I even living for? The question lingered into the weekend. One morning, scrolling through social media, Ethan came across a photo of a small pottery studio in the mountains. In the image, an elderly potter worked quietly at his wheel, framed by a backdrop of still green hills. Something about it radiated a peace that felt worlds apart from Ethan's noisy days. Within hours, he put in for extended leave, booked a bus ticket, and left the city behind. The 7-hour journey took him along winding mountain roads, past pine forests and small villages shrouded in mist. When the bus finally stopped at the studio gate, Ethan took a deep breath. No car horns, no flashing billboards, just the sound of wind through thatched roofs and the earthy scent of damp soil. He didn't know if this place would give him the answers he was looking for, but at the very least, it gave him a reason to pause. On his first morning at the pottery studio, Ethan woke not to the blare of his usual alarm, but to a soft wash of sunlight filtering through the window and the distant crow of a rooster. Stepping outside, he saw the studio's owner, an elderly man with a lean frame but strong, weathered hands tending the kill fire. The old man turned with a gentle smile. Up already? Come here today, you'll try your hand at making pottery. He placed a lump of cool, dark brown clay into Ethan's palms. Make whatever you want. Don't worry about whether it's perfect. It sounded simple enough, but for Ethan, someone used to working within strict standards, it felt oddly unsettling. He set the clay on the spinning wheel and began shaping a small vase. At first, things went smoothly. He focused on the movement of his hands, feeling the clay soften and rise under his touch. A slender vase emerged, its mouth slightly flared, its body curving gracefully. But just before it was finished, his hand accidentally bumped the rim. A dent appeared, spoiling the symmetry he'd worked so hard to create. Damn, he muttered. Immediately, he tried to fix it, pressing and smoothing, attempting to force the rim back into place. But the clay began to sag, the body leaning to one side. The harder he tried, the worse it looked, until it became a lopsided, uneven mess. This one's ruined. I'll just start over, he sighed. The old man, who had quietly watched from the side, finally spoke. Don't throw it away. Let's fire it as it is. Ethan frowned. He'd never considered keeping a mistake, especially when it ruined the original vision. But the calm certainty in the old man's eyes convinced him to try. He set the crooked vase in the kiln alongside the others. While it baked, Ethan felt uneasy, as though he'd left a glaring error for the world to see. It reminded him of times at work, when even a tiny flaw in a report would keep him up all night fixing it. To him, mistakes were things to eliminate, not accept. Hours later, when the vase came out, Ethan was stunned. Under the glossy glaze, the once awkward dent now looked like a graceful, organic curve, almost as if it had been part of the design all along. A customer visiting the studio spotted it, bought it immediately, and remarked, "It's got character, doesn't look like those perfect, lifeless ones." Ethan gave a small, awkward smile, part embarrassed, part intrigued. A thought began to form in his mind. What if I'd been looking at flaws the wrong way? Ethan was still processing how his crooked vase had been praised and sold so quickly. He stood silently, watching the customer leave with it, feeling both relieved and oddly unsettled. The old man's words kept echoing in his head. "Don't throw it away. Let's fire it as it is." As if sensing his thoughts, the old man poured a cup of steaming tea, set it on the worn wooden table, and sat across from him. "Do you know why I didn't let you fix the vase?" he asked. Ethan hesitated, because he wanted to see if it might turn out better. The old man shook his head, smiling. "No, I wanted you to see that what you call a mistake can sometimes be an irreplaceable feature." He took a slow sip of tea before continuing. "People get obsessed with making everything perfect. The moment something strays from the plan, they rush to erase or fix it. But in doing so, they often erase its liveliness, its uniqueness." Ethan stayed quiet, realizing how closely those words described his own life. He had spent hours polishing the wording of a single client email, scrapping bold ideas just because they weren't flawless from the start. He had even tried to repair relationships that had already broken beyond mending, only to exhaust both sides. "You see," the old man went on, "clay is like life. If you keep forcing it into a mold, making it fit one exact shape, it will push back. But if you accept the bumps and bends, sometimes they form a beauty you could never have planned." He stood, running his fingers over an old vase sitting in the corner. It was weathered, with a tilted rim and a slightly leaning body. "I made this over 30 years ago. Back then, I thought it was ruined and almost threw it away. But I kept it. All these years later, it's still here on. Visitors often linger on it, longer than they do on the perfect ones." Ethan held his tea, feeling the warmth spread from his hands to his chest. The old man's words felt like hammer strikes on the shell he had built over years, the shell of someone who always had to be right, polished, sputtered. The old man looked at him, his voice calm but full of weight. "Sometimes, the road to a life worth living isn't about fixing every crack, it's about letting them become part of you." Ethan didn't reply, but he knew that something inside him had just been quietly set free. That night, Ethan didn't fall asleep right away. He lay on the simple bamboo bed in his small room at the pottery studio, moonlight spilling through the wooden window frame, painting pale streaks across the floor. The air was filled with the soft hum of crickets and the rustle of wind through the bamboo outside. Everything was so still, he could hear his own heartbeat. In the dark, the image of the crooked vase and the old man's words replayed in his mind. "Sometimes what you call a mistake is actually your signature." He realized that for years, he had lived like an extreme perfectionist, shaping his life to fit someone else's standards. Flawless KPIs, a clear promotion track, perfectly staged travel photos, even a smile timed for the right moment. But the more he fixed things, the more disconnected he felt from himself. Like a vase reshaped so many times it loses its original form. He no longer recognized what was truly his own. The flaws he had worked so hard to erase, a bold idea dismissed as unrealistic, an impulsive decision that led to failure, a love that ended unfinished were, in fact, the very things that had once made him alive and different. He remembered the feeling of placing that first lump of clay on the wheel earlier that morning. At first, it was formless, then slowly it took shape beneath his hands. But with one careless touch, it changed, and instead of accepting that change, he'd fought to restore its old form, until the old man stepped in. Sitting up, Ethan poured himself a glass of water. He looked out into the moonlit yard, where rows of glazed vases stood drying, each with its own shape, none identical. A small smile formed on his lips. Maybe life isn't a big project with a perfect finish line at the end. Maybe it's more like making pottery, each day some vases straight, some crooked, some smooth, some bumpy on, each carrying a story of its own. Tomorrow morning, he would make another vase. But this time, he wouldn't aim for perfection. He would let the clay guide him, let his hands feel the moment, let the curves and bumps form naturally. Because now he understood, value doesn't come from being flawless, comes from being fully present in the act of creating. He whispered to himself, almost like a promise, "You don't have to be perfect, you just have to be real." A few weeks after selling all the goods in the pottery studio, Ethan happened to pass by a small street that he'd rarely visited before. The air was crisp, and the wind carried the faint fragrance of bougainvillea, spilling over porches. He stopped suddenly. On the porch of an old house, a ceramic vase sat neatly on a wooden shelf. A small chip was missing from its rim, and a long crack ran down its side. But what made Ethan pause wasn't the flaw, it was how the homeowner had transformed it into something alive. Sprigs of lavender spilled from the rim, their purple blossoms catching the late afternoon light, making the crack seem like an intentional design from nature itself. An elderly man with silver hair stepped out and smiled. "Beautiful, isn't it? I found it in a little shop. Everyone said no one would buy something like this. But to me, it's perfect. That crack doesn't make it less, it reminds me that everything has its own story." Ethan lowered his head slightly and smiled. He realized it wasn't just his first ruined vase that carried meaning. Anything, no matter how imperfect, could become a source of joy if placed in the right setting and seen with appreciative eyes. As he walked away, a gentle breeze swept down the empty street, carrying the scent of lavender. A quiet warmth filled his chest. He knew that from now on, whenever he saw a crack in an object, in another person, or within himself, he would remember this afternoon. And so, the story of the vases continued, not just in his hands, but in the eyes of those who could see beauty in what was imperfect. It was a reminder that true value doesn't lie in perfection, but in how we choose to face our flaws and turn them into something meaningful. Every crack, every failure, every loss can be the starting point of a new journey, if we have the patience and the faith